Just say some words. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the event today hosted by the Sydney Democracy Network of the University of Sydney. I'm Qin Jun of the China Democracy Forum to chair this talk. The China Democracy Forum is to observe and analyze the current development of the political situation in China. Mr. Jonathan Fenby is the guest speaker today. Jonathan Fenby has written 14 books, 7 of them on China. His most recent book, Will China Dominate the 21st Century, has just been published. His previous book, Tiger Head, Snake Tail, in Chinese, China Today has chosen as a book of the year by The Guardian, Financial Times, and the Bloomberg survey of leading economists and business paper. His Tangled History of Modern China was similarly chosen as a book of the year by the leading critics. Jonathan is a founding partner and managing director of China Research at the Emerging Markets Research Service, Trusted Sources. He speaks regularly on China and international affairs at the conferences, corporate meetings, universities, and think tanks, as well as contributing to the publications, university broadcasting stations and websites in the United Kingdom, Europe, the United States, and Asia Pacific. How long would you talk today?
Just about half an hour.
Okay.
Yes. Have a discussion.
All right. Mr. Fenby will talk 30 minutes. Then we will have an open discussion. Now we welcome Mr. Fenby to address the Sydney Democracy Network. Here you go.
Thank you. Well, I apologise again for my late arrival. Thank you for waiting inside on such a beautiful day and putting me out on the lawns and so on. I want to talk fairly concisely because I hope we'll have room for a good discussion after that on how I see China today and how I see China evolving. As you'll be aware, I'm sure, there are two kind of Manichaean streams of interpretation and thought about China. One is that the development of China is unsustainable, that the growth will run out at some point, that it is based on factors, above all credit and high infrastructure spending, which cannot be sustained. The economy will therefore slow down, collapse. At best, China will be caught in what is known as the middle income trap, that this will have a knock-on effect on the political regime and bring down the system as we know it. You might call this the collapsist school interpretation of China. And one remembers the first book to argue this on the economic front was Gordon Chang's book, The Coming Collapse of China, which was published in 2001. And 13 years have passed since then, and no collapse has taken place. So there is a sense in which China has defied, certainly on the economic side, the laws of conventional economics, and politically has been able to maintain the last major Leninist communist system of political rule on earth. There is on the other side of the argument what you might call the rulist school, epitomized by the 2009 book, When China Rules the World. And this does two things. It extrapolates from the economic trends of the last 10 years to show China moving ahead of the rest of the world, possessing the biggest economy, which it certainly will do within the next 4 or 5 years, moving from number 2 to number 1 position overtaken in the United States. But this argument also rests on the thesis that underpinning the growth of China is a unique civilizational state, as one author, Martin Jakes, has put it, and as developed by other writers, particularly around a man called Eric Lee, based in Shanghai, China has developed a system of governance which they equate with the imperial civil service system, which is held to be able to plan and implement policies in a way that escapes messy Western democracies, and therefore that the Chinese economy is going to move inexorably ahead of the rest of the world, and that the Chinese political system and cultural system is superior to that to be found in democracies in the West, and this will inevitably not only triumph, but set a model for the rest of the world. Well, it won't surprise you that I think both theses are wrong. China is not going to collapse, it's not going to fall apart, its economy will slow down, there's no doubt about that, and I can say a bit more about that if you like. Its political system, while it shows all the weaknesses of an authoritarian top-down system, has proved extraordinarily resilient. I remember back when I was editing the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong at the end of the 90s, having dinner with Bill Clinton, who was passing through on his way back from China, and he said, we have to encourage China's economic growth because that will produce the development of the middle class, and this middle class in China will agitate for democracy, i.e. applying the North American, Western European 18th and 19th century models to China. Well, that hasn't happened. As you'll be aware, in 2002, Jiang Zemin, as he stepped down from the party secretary, put through the three represents, which basically recognized the middle class as one of the accepted social factors in China, in a sense abolishing old-fashioned Marxist class war. And what has happened since then is that by and large, and I know this is a generalization, the middle class have done very well in China, and from a purely selfish, cynical point of view, don't have very much interest in political democracy, competitive democracy, which would enfranchise hundreds of millions of poorer people who would then be able to press their cause to the detriment of the middle class. So in fact, the middle class so far has been a status quo influence in China more than anything else. So I don't think China is going to collapse. On the other hand, as I'll now try to demonstrate, I don't think it's going to rule the world either. It is not going to dominate the 21st century. I don't want to spoil your reading of my book by giving away the end of it before I start, but that is what it is. It is, by the way, quite a short book, 25,000 words. I'm told it can be read in a morning. Several people have read it in the morning, and it's part of a series from an English academic publisher, Polity, on big questions for our time. Will global warming kill us all? Will capitalism collapse in the Middle East? And will China dominate the world? Now, when I give a negative response to that, I'm not in any way underrating the progress in purely material terms, which has been made in China over the last 35 years, since Deng Xiaoping launched economic reform in 1978. Sorry, yeah. Okay, right. Wait, if you go back to the previous one, we've gone from a largely agrarian society, despite Mao's worst efforts during the Great Leap Forward, to this kind of assembly line manufacturing, with which you'll be familiar, huge assembly shops, particularly in Shenzhen. We've gone from the period of the Opium War and the empire to a regime run by men in business suits. This, of course, is the Standing Committee of the Politburo, appointed at the Party Congress in November 2012, with third from left, the party secretary, Xi Jinping, who now, as you may have seen, is not only boss as head of the Communist Party, but also has 6 other jobs. He has 1 job for each day of the week, in fact, if you wish to. He is General Secretary, he's State President, and therefore travels abroad to represent China. He's in India at the moment. He'll be coming to Australia for the G20 next month, I think. He is Chair of the Military Commission, which of course, given the political importance of the PLA, the Army, is an extremely crucial job. He has also created a National Security Council and put himself in charge of it. He has put himself in charge of economic reform as head of the Economic Reform Council. He's head of the Cyber Security Commission and head of the Military Modernisation Commission, as well as being head of shadowy Politburo leading groups on foreign affairs and other matters. So he has accumulated in the last 2 years, I think, more power in his own hands than any other Chinese leader we've seen since Mao Zedong. If you remember, Deng Xiaoping, the previous strongman in China, operated mainly through other people, through other party secretaries, through other prime ministers, which didn't always turn out very well. Xi is up there, right front, directing things in a very personal way and using a lot of publicity and spin for that. And I would say, although superlatives are always dangerous, that Xi is probably the most powerful political leader of any major nation on earth, with, of course, the great ability that this is a one-party state in which the legislature does what it is told. Next to him, Li Keqiang, the Prime Minister, leading member of the Party Youth League group, which was led by Hu Jintao, the previous leader before him. But Li lost out in the leadership competition with Xi Jinping and operates very much as a chief operating officer. If you think of China as a company, you have Xi as chairman and CEO, and Li very much as COO. I saw him in London when he was there a few months ago, and it was very like an operating officer of a company, reading out the numbers, reading out the targets, keeping to the script very, very carefully indeed. On the right, you may be familiar with Wang Qishan, the former senior vice president, premier for economic affairs, who's handled a lot, particularly the international economic matters under Hu Jintao, and at the party congress was shifted away from the economy to be head of the party disciplinary commission. That surprised some people. The main reason, I think, was that had he been continued to be in charge of economic affairs, that would have been too much of a threat and a problem, challenge for Li Keqiang. And people were a bit surprised that Wang was moved into this job. But he was very quickly given a very important role in charge of the anti-corruption campaign, which you'll be familiar with. At the time, the joke in Beijing, I was there in November 2012 during the Congress, was that he'd been given the anti-corruption campaign because he has no children. So he doesn't have to protect any of his siblings, his offspring, and so on. But in fact, that campaign, and I'll come to that in a moment, is being used, I think, for more than simply getting at Xi Jinping's opponents, the classic way it is. You can see that Wang, he looks rather sad here, just having been promoted to the top, which is a bit funny. He's slightly individualistic here, because he's the only one not wearing a red tie. He's also the only one who allows his hair to recede. You can see the others' wonderful hairdos. I'm very jealous of them. I'm based in China. There. I'm told by an ex-British ambassador that there is a leadership hair treatment plant somewhere in the second ring road in Beijing. He may be pulling my leg, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, what I'm saying is here are a group of men, and they are all men. There are 2 women in the wider 25-person Politburo. Here is a group of men who are, in a sense, business executives. They're running China Inc. The comparison is sometimes made with mafia clans of the leadership in China. I prefer to, there is another to that, but I prefer to see this more as a kind of corporate, they are running China Inc. And their shareholder is the Chinese Communist Party, to whom they have to deliver continued maintenance in power of the system as it is at the moment. Next slide there. So China has become, this China Inc., if you like, has become, I think, its emergence over the last 30 years has been the most important event in global affairs since the end of the Cold War. And in some ways, given the condition of the Soviet Union at the end, even more, it predates that. Deng Xiaoping, I'm told by somebody I met here yesterday that in fact he did write an economics treatise in the 1950s at some point. I've never seen this. There's a gentleman's going to promises to send it to me. But he did have some grounding in economics. But when he made the decision to go for economic growth in 1978, it was an economic decision, but it was basically a political decision. And here we come back to China in the Communist Party, in CCP, if you like. Deng could see in 1978, 2 years after the death of Mao, when he won out in the power struggle that followed Mao's death, he could see that China was in a terrible state after 30 years of Mao, particularly after the Cultural Revolution. He could also see that the Communist Party was in a terrible state because of what the Cultural Revolution had done to the Communist Party structure and leadership. He himself had been purged, of course, during that period. And Deng was a Chinese patriot, also a lifelong communist. He joined the party as a teenager in France in the 1920s. And his aim, having reached the top, was to restore China as a great power and to make the Communist Party the vehicle by which that renaissance took place, thereby giving the party a legitimacy which it had largely lost in the later days of Mao. And he seized on economic growth as the means of doing that. And economic growth entailed opening up China, of course, you know, the famous opening up process, to the rest of the world. And you can see how exports, although the current leadership wants to be less dependent upon exports, they remain an extremely both volatile but important and self-generating, if you like, element in the Chinese economy. You see that the downturn there at the end of 2008, and how quickly that shoots up, and how increasingly China has been able to diversify its exports away from the US, Japan, and the EU to the rest of the world. And so this chart is a little bit out of date. In fact, the EU figure over the summer has gone up quite strikingly, which may be what we used to call the Walmart effect, which is when economies in the developed world are soggy and people are counting their pennies and cents, they tend to buy cheaper goods, and those tend to be Chinese goods through supermarkets and department stores. So in fact, bad times in the West can be quite stimulative for the Chinese economy. So we have Deng, this the famous in Shenzhen's portrait of him almost sort of roundabout in Shenzhen, who seizes on economic growth for a political purpose. And I would argue that that has always been the case in China, and it remains the case today. When there was the downturn at the end of 2008 and the big stimulus package was announced then, that very briefly there was a quote from Hu Jintao that appeared on the website of People's Daily and was removed quite soon afterwards, which said basically our ability to bring China out of this downturn is a test of the Communist Party's ability to rule the country. This is the kind of link which I think is umbilical in China. And of course, we've had growth, which is now trending down. I'm sorry, again, this is slightly over the chart, which we'll probably update. Trending down towards 7.5%. I'll be lucky to hit the real 7.5% this year. Trending down towards 7% and probably around 6.5, 6.8 when we go into the new 5-year plan period in 18 months or so. Of course, China, because of its size, produces superlatives all the time. This is a very, very short list. When I was writing my book, Tiger Head, which has the first chapter, kind of establishes the growth of China, my wife, who reads my manuscripts behind me, came into my study and said, the first chapter, this is all very fine, but why is everything the biggest, the largest, the longest, the most? Isn't there something where China is the smallest? And I'm still trying to identify that. You may be able to help me here. But inevitably, when you get 1.3 billion people evolving and moving forward, you are going to have this whole raft of superlatives. And the growth of China, the situation we find, undoubtedly has great strengths. And the Communist Party, and here I come on to the political system, draws considerable strengths from the scale and size and speed of China's rise, the economic growth, which has probably pulled more people out of poverty in a shorter time than we've ever seen before in human history. That, of course, has downsides, which I'll come to in a second, but I think is generally, has worked as Deng Xiaoping thought it would in giving the party a strength, a kind of legitimacy, an interiorist legitimacy, if you like, which it had lacked before then. You also have to take into account, I think, the history of China, which, as you just heard in the introduction, I've written a lengthy 880-page book about modern China. And if you take the period from the Opium Wars through to the death of Mao in 1976, I don't think any country has had such a sustained turbulence and pressures upon it, from internal causes, from invasion from abroad, from natural disasters, from regime change, civil war, rebellions, territorial loss, etc., all through this period. And I think there's a kind of, it's a dangerous thing to do, I know, with popular psychology, but in the national psyche, there is a kind of feeling of, it may not be great at the moment, but it's better than it's been for a very long time. And we certainly don't want to go back to where we were previously. And in those terms, there's relative stability in China. Now, of course, there are 180,000 protests every year in China, so you may say, why is he putting stability up there? These are almost entirely one issue. They're over local issues, over corruption, over land grabs, over police misbehaviour, over rising bus fares, over developments, petrochemical plants, or other things. They're all one issue things. There is no broader protest or opposition movement in China. There's no Red Army lurking up in Shaanxi province waiting to come and claim the mandate of heaven. And for the Han Chinese, at any rate, there is national unity, most certainly. The issues of Tibet and Xinjiang, which exercise people outside China, quite rightly, are not, I would say, a problem, an issue for most of the Han Chinese, who regard the Tibetans and the Uyghurs as pretty unsavory, backward, superstitious people. There is no, as it were, Tibetan liberation movement within the Han Chinese community there. So China has national unity. Yes, it is a form of colonial unity enforced by the People's Liberation Army in Tibet and in Xinjiang, and obviously, particularly in Xinjiang, but also in Tibet with the immolation of monks and nuns. It is going to create recurrent difficulties and problems, which will be reported in the world press a lot, but which, to my knowledge, and I looked at a number of polls that have been done on this, and just speaking Chinese, reading it, this is not really an internal problem within China itself. And the sheer lack of opposition, although we deplore it, is a strength for the regime, because the Communist Party since 1949 has very effectively demolished or absorbed all the instruments of civic society which might have stood in the way of its power control. I think power control is at the heart of the Communist Party's DNA. So that unfortunate fact about China, the lack of opposition, is actually still a source of strength for the Communist Party, and one sees very little, I'm afraid, possibility of opposition arising, given, particularly under Xi Jinping, while he's been trying for economic reform, politically he is extremely conservative, and as you will have seen, has been clamping down on dissidents of all kinds. Individual freedom, as you'll know from visiting China, is quite high in China. People talking to each other, using social media particularly over recent years. But any kind of organised opposition is going to go on being suppressed very dramatically. On the other hand, there are weaknesses, and this is why I think China will not dominate the world, because mainly because of internal factors, which I'll just go through briefly. We've had this great growth, but the imbalances and inequalities have grown very, very fast indeed. mainly in two areas, between the coastal areas, which are first world in many ways, particularly infrastructure. Coming from London, you know, the Shanghai infrastructure works sort of better than the infrastructure in London. But go back into central and western China, and go back in a very more backward, different age. And then the personal inequalities between the rich and the poor. I think as a broad brush statement, you could say that over the last, particularly over the last dozen years, the poor have got less poor, but the rich have got richer even faster. And often through means which are very unpopular, involving corruption, connections, and so on. The Gini coefficient measuring wealth inequalities is much higher in China than it is in, say, Europe or the United States, not like Australia. Then you've got the environment. The price of growth has been the despoiling of the environment, particularly we have air pollution, which is much written about. Maybe something is last starting to be done about that with the banning of imported dirty coal, only imported, mind you. But there was an international university survey last year which found that life expectancy in a northern Chinese city is 5.5 years less than in a southern unpolluted city. So you can see the effect of that, and the effect of that on people every day, because you've got to breathe. And if you're in Beijing, there's no way of escaping the bad air. Even if you lock your keep inside, the air has a tendency to get in. So you have air purifiers everywhere, etc. But as well as air pollution, there is water pollution. 180 cities take their water drinking water directly from rivers into which raw sewage goes. Lack of water purification, and also, of course, in northern China, a sheer absence of water. There were reports earlier this week that some people in Beijing have started to hire companies to drill wells in their backyards because they can't get access to water all the time. You also have the pollution of soil pollution, which has come to light recently, which is mainly agricultural land from industrial waste, heavy metal deposits, and above all pesticides from farms, which is estimated to impact on 10 to 12% of China's farmland, meaning that crops grown there may be not toxic, but mildly toxic. So you've got the environment. You've also got the question of food safety, which regularly comes up in China. And an interesting thing, somebody told me the other day who's done a study on this. In Chinese e-commerce, which is developing very fast indeed, one of the biggest items in this is food. Chinese buying food on e-commerce, and a lot of that food is foreign food because Chinese trust Australian milk or whatever it may be. And so you've got the whole question of food safety there. And that leads to the trust deficit. I say, who do you trust? You know, there's the saying, only believe something when the government denies it. Well, you might say that in England too, quite often. But there is this feeling of who do I trust? Where are the bodies, the authorities, the independent, accountable organs of society in which I can trust? There is corruption, of course, and the anti-corruption campaign has become very big. 180,000 officials were punished last year, according to state media. Xi has gone for the big tigers, he's also gone for a lot of the flies, but I think he's using the anti-corruption campaign to try to get better management in some of the big state-owned enterprises. We've already seen signs of that. So it is actually playing part in the reform agenda to make the economy more effective and more efficient. We have the demographics. You'll be aware, you know, does China get old before it gets rich? The diminishing number of young people coming into the labour force, that actually fell for the first time last year, but at the same time better healthcare, meaning that life expectancy is above 70, and this in a society where there is very little provision for old age care outside the family, and a black hole of a pension system. And speaking of the family, people say, oh yes, well, the Chinese family will always look after the old people. But the National People's Congress has passed a law saying that if you are a parent or grandparent, legally, you have the right to insist on your children visiting you, which tells me something about how the family isn't functioning as it used to be. We have the problems of Tibet and Xinjiang, which I mentioned, and which will go on and on and on. I don't see any end to that. There is the uncertainty of China's global role. China has become a major power in the world, above all economically, but it doesn't play anything like a great power role in international affairs. It complains that the world is run by rules set up before it came on the scene, but it doesn't put forward any proposals to change these. And its foreign relations are almost entirely bilateral. It has one treaty ally, North Korea, but it deals, for instance, in the disputes in Southeast Asia and East Asian seas. It deals with all these on a bilateral basis. There's no attempt at a coordinated, cohesive foreign policy approach. I think that one-party rule in the end will be a weakness for China, because the preservation of the party rule demands a preservation of the status quo in the end, the safeguarding of those vested interests which do very well and depend upon one-party rule, and this stands in the way of progress. There will be economic reform. Xi Jinping has put his name to that at the party plenum last November. There's no doubt about that. It won't be wholesale. The 60 decisions decided last November, they won't all be put into effect, and it will take time. This is a 7-year, 6-year program ahead of us. But undoubtedly there is a recognition of the need for reform. The trouble is that reform comes at a price. It actually means slower growth, it may mean higher inflation, it means big pressure for the state-owned enterprises, and above all, the price is the posing of what I think is the fundamental question, the fundamental reason why China will not grow into the world's dominant power, that the preservation of the economy, the modernization of the economy, which is at the heart, which is, if you like, the floor, the foundation of this whole process, entails inevitably a liberalization and a freeing up of the system, not simply economically, but with social and political implications, which will bring into jeopardy the dominant position of the Communist Party. And Xi Jinping, in 4 or 5, I don't know, years' time, will be faced with what we call the Gorbachev question. Does he bring in reforms and allow reforms which are needed to make China really number one economically, to keep it number one economically, but which bring into question the whole preservation of the Communist Party system? And his statements so far have made it clear that he will put political power ahead of anything else when push comes to shove. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fenby. It's a very good talk.
I had one more slide, but I think you put the next slide on just because it's a very nice picture. But it repeats what I just said.
Now we're getting to the next stage, questions and answers. As a chair, I just make good use of this right to ask the first question. Do you think the current leadership would keep its economic dynamic and the status quo, its political status quo, for a long run?
I think they will. They aim. Do you want to press it down? I'll stand up. I'll stand up. They will try to do so. If you look at the party plenum document, the 60 decisions for reform, last November, there was one. Sorry, I don't remember the Chinese answer that they say that there were 2 statements of that. One said, so there were 3 things that were important about that, 4 things that were important about that. I'm going on slightly of a tangent, but I probably should say. The first important thing was that this reform program was drawn up and adopted by the Communist Party plenum. Previous economic reform proposals had come from the government, particularly from Wen Jiabao, if you remember, in 2010. And they were squashed by the Communist Party, by the Politburo. Xu Zhongcan taking a leading role in this, it might be said. This time, what Xi has done is he has moved the economic argument, the economic reform argument, from the government into the party, in the top level of the party, and that gives it more clout, undoubtedly. He said that. We need the clout of the party to deal with vested interests. There's no doubt. So that, if you like, is a plus point for reform, the economic reform. But in this document, there was a statement that China, in the accompanying paper, the main statement, listed 12 challenges facing China, including most of the ones that I've mentioned there, and said at the end, reform is the only way of dealing with these. Now that, again, is an important commitment coming from the Communist Party. Then there was a third statement in the document saying, we will, quote, harness the dynamism of the market to achieve modernization and reform. So a lot of people, including financial markets, thought, that's great, we're off to the races here, private enterprise will be allowed a free hand, etc., etc., etc. Good. But then, after these three positive things, you've got the clincher further down, which was the whole of this process will be used to increase the dominance of the state. And the whole question is whether the use of not just the market, but more liberalisation, which you need to do the economic changes in China. For instance, in the financial sector, you've got to stop lending money by credit quotas. You've got to have a freer thing, if only to help a private enterprise. Is that compatible with the political status quo? Clearly, that is Xi Jinping's big gamble, his 64,000, you used to say, question is, can you do those two at the same time? He thinks you can. I'm pretty doubtful that you can. Which is why I think there will be a crunch at some point when you'll have to decide between the two priorities.
Thank you. Now, question open to the floor. So, please ask your questions. When you ask questions, just mention who you are. Thank you. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Salvatore Bobonis of the University of Sydney. Not quite covered in your talk, but I'm sure you're more.
There were many things I should have covered there.
Taiwan is...
Yes, of course I missed that.
Well, but no, I don't actually want to ask you about Taiwan. I mean, Taiwan is an open society, so I know about the Chinese, I know about the Taiwanese view of China and occupied parliament, the reactions to the investment law and all this. What I don't know about is Chinese reactions to Taiwan. How pervasive is Taiwanese business in China? How influential are Taiwanese attitudes in China? How aware are Chinese elites of the possibility of studying in Taiwan or of investment visas? I mean, how is this seen from the Chinese side, is what I'm curious.
Taiwan is quite pervasive, particularly in southern China. If you take the Pearl River Delta and so on there, I mean, through Hong Kong too, there's a lot of Taiwanese influence there. Taiwan, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, the whole semiconductor and electronics business in Taiwan are moving onto the mainland because it works. Because basically, as I say, semiconductors, you have a very long investment, big investment, and a very short product cycle. So there's always the problem with this. Whereas in China, there's no problem because the government's going to put up the money and will buy everything that it wants to, because it's trying to launch a semiconductor industry of its own. There's an increasing awareness. I think there's quite a high awareness of Taiwan, but there's obviously the political edge to it, simply that, still for the Chinese, this is the renegade province, which has to be brought back. And obviously, Hu Jintao's softer line towards Taiwan after 2008 Ma's election and so on was designed to bring Taiwan back into the fold through the economy, largely, and through exchanges there. And I think that you visit Taiwan, you're there frequently?
I'm going on sabbatical next semester.
Right. I haven't been to Taiwan for a couple of years.
I'm not an expert, though.
No, I just hesitate, I haven't been there for a couple of years. But meeting Taiwanese politicians when they come through London, admittedly, a lot of them from the DPP, they are certainly, there seems to be a kind of feeling that enough is enough, and Ma has made enough concessions to China, and you're getting to the point where Taiwanese identity is coming under a threat there. And so I think it's quite possible you'll get a DPP victory in the next presidential election, they get a decent candidate together, and then, you know, does she go on with the softly, or is the PLA an authority to have a few war games? We can see that. So I think there is an awareness. And the funny thing is that, you know, speaking to people in Beijing, Shanghai as well, in China, Taiwan doesn't come up very often in conversations as a matter. But certainly the economic links, you know, have grown and are growing further. And you know, some of the cultural links, and the case I was in the people from the National Museum in Beijing, and they were lamenting that why are all our treasures across the sea in Taiwan, can't we get them back?
I'm T. John from Taiwan.
You could have told us all, you could have told us that.
I would like to know what's the point of view if what happened in Hong Kong and Taiwan.
Absolutely.
The democratic development in these two places will impact China or not? Or?
I think China will make sure that it does as little as possible. I mean, I think Taiwan's been a tremendous success story. I mean, it's proved that you can have a democracy in a Chinese territory, whatever we're going to call Taiwan. But the Hong Kong thing is very interesting because one country, two systems, I believe, was originally evolved for Taiwan rather than Hong Kong, and then was applied to Hong Kong. The Taiwanese didn't want anything for it. I was in Hong Kong editing the South China Morning Post over the handover in the 1990s, and I remember writing some perhaps rather unpopular editorials at the time, saying, yes, it's fine, we've got one country, two systems, and we're all very happy with the second system, the preservation of, but never forget what comes first in this formulation, which is one country. And when China, Beijing chooses to exercise that, which is what's happening at the moment, there's nothing you can do about it, because elections, for instance, the British, in the joint declaration of 1984, there was agreement that the chief executive of China, Hong Kong, would eventually be appointed, named by election. But there was no definition of what this election meant. Was it an open competitive election, etc., etc., etc.? And as an old English civil servant, Akers Jones, said at one point during the handover when people were talking about elections in Hong Kong, he said, I don't know what everybody's complaining about. The Chinese have nothing against elections. In fact, they rather like elections. They just like to know the result before the polls open. So, you know, an election is an election is an election. You have to be careful there. But I think probably what's happening in Hong Kong, I mean, you can tell me, in Taiwan, will be having a very negative effect in Taiwan as regards the view of the mainland China there. Because, you know, it's seen as clamping down, and you certainly don't want anything like that in Taiwan.
Before I came to Sydney, which is less than 2 months ago, I just met some Hong Kong students from Hong Kong, and they told me they are not satisfied with the state school in Hong Kong, and during the Occupy.
The Occupy.
Occupy Central.
Yeah, Occupy Central.
Many Hong Kong people told us, please, against Chinese, over our empire. This is what they say to us.
I think, I mean, I don't want to be negative, but I think there is a problem. There's a problem has arisen, so this is going to Hong Kong, with the Occupy Central route, because the pro-democracy movement has become identified with Occupy Central. And the trouble is, most people in Hong Kong probably don't want actually action to Occupy Central, let us say. And a lot of the, if like the pan-democratic camp in Hong Kong, in a sense, it can now be attacked by the Chinese, by the Beijing, for allying themselves with the Occupy Central movement. I understand how it all evolved with the online referendum, etc., etc., but it's almost putting a card in Beijing's hands.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, next question, Razor. Yeah. Professor
Michael Wallace from the University of New South Wales. Thank you very much for the lecture. I am wondering where you see the legal system in mainland China fitting into all this.
Yeah.
I remember following you pure after 1989 with a very famous opinion piece in which you said it's impossible to have economic reforms without a firm legal basis.
Yeah.
They don't have that in China, therefore what Deng Xiaoping is trying to do is never going to work.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, let's say you're a democracy group, so it's not me to answer it is on the side of your question. I don't think you could have a movement, a serious movement towards democracy in mainland China without the rule of law. I think that is the essential thing. And what you say is true, that the development of business without a proper, open, transparent legal system is going to run into the sand at some point. But if agreements are based on accommodation, arbitration, agreements behind closed doors, all the guild approach, if you like, to business law, which has always been there in China through the imperial period, I think that is a big disadvantage indeed. It's one that people have got round to a large extent, as they get around many problems there. But I would agree that is a problem. Interesting to come back to Hong Kong, if I may, that just before the handover, Lu Ping, the main Chinese negotiator, head of the Hong Kong Macau office, he used to come down to Hong Kong once a month for a weekend and so on and so on. And on one of these visits, there was a big dispute going on between the British and Beijing over the composition of the Court of Final Appeal, if you remember, which basically the Chinese wanted to be able to decide who was going to sit on the Court of Final Appeal there. They didn't all have to be Chinese, but they wanted a veto power of that. And Lu Ping had lunch with a group of the big Chinese Hong Kong tycoons, and one of them told me this afterwards. And they said to him, if you do that, we will move all our company headquarters to Singapore immediately. And within a week, China had changed its tune and agreed to independent judges. So you can see, Hong Kong, this is an absolutely vital thing, I think. But you're starting from a situation in China where there really never has been codified, transparent, independent legal system, of course, there. And you have, as you will know in China, people talk about Confucianism all the time, and I think the legalism school, which basically means you use the law to beat everybody into line to obey the rulers. That's been actually the dominant theme of Chinese governance going back to the first emperor. And I think that's exactly what Xi Jinping is doing at the moment. We've got the anti-corruption campaign being used not just against political enemies, but now being used in business. 6 senior executives of PetroChina, senior executives of Three Gorges Dam, of Guangdong Power, China Resources, Bright Foods, all being done for corruption. But this is being done outside the legal system. This is Wang Qishan and the Communist Party Disciplinary Commission, which is doing that. And as you know, they can pick you up, hold you for recurring 6-month periods in a secret location without a charge. And whether you're found guilty or not, there is no right to any lawyers or anything like that, and so on. So I think the respect, and there's a lot of talk of the legal reform in China, and the party plenum to be held probably next month is meant to be on legal reform. But I think what that actually means for Xi Jinping is making the blunt arm of the law a more efficient instrument for his governance there. And that's not what I understand as the rule of law.
Yeah.
My name is Jan, and I'm from the University of Sydney and the Department of Immigration. So first of all, thank you very much for your lecture, Mr. Fenby. My question is regarding the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And as you have mentioned, China hasn't done enough in terms of international negotiations, and I wonder, for this organization, SCO, do you think it has a potentiality to rival the NATO and play a somehow geopolitically similar role to the Warsaw Pact?
I don't think it's going to go that far. I think its members' interests are. I mean, the great thing with NATO, well, what brought NATO together and held NATO together was there was a threat. It was perceived as a Soviet threat, and so on. And equally much the Warsaw Pact, there was a NATO threat. And NATO, as you saw, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO more or less disintegrated. Now it's trying to come together with some difficulty, faced again with the threat of Putin. I don't think there's a similar threat seen by the Shanghai people to bind them together. And their interests are very different. I think. So my answer would be no to that. But I think what is very interesting, not to go on too long about this, is the developing China-Russia relationship, which you're seeing. And that, they've always been quite wary of each other, China and Russia. But I think all the signs are at the moment that Xi Jinping and the Chinese think they are on top now, and Putin is in a weak position. So you're getting, I think, a big gas deal, $400 billion gas deal signed, what, 3 months ago, 2-3 months ago. You've got China, they're building ports together. Chinese are due to redevelop the Moscow metro system. You're going to get lots of joint military maneuvers in the East China Sea off Japan. So that is an interesting relationship which is developing, which in a sense is positive on relative Russian weakness, and China thinking it's up. Of course, the joker in all this is Japan. China is going to remain very hostile to Japan, and under Abe, Japan has taken a much more assertive attitude. I mean, in the past, if you remember 2010, drunken Chinese trawler captain rammed into some Japanese coast guards, and it was the Japanese who apologized for this. Now, Abe is trying to stand high for domestic reasons and being quite provocative in various ways, I must say. And I think you've got to a position between those two countries, which is, we always think that when there's a dispute, both sides really want a solution. I think in this case, neither China nor Japan wants a solution because it plays very well internally to nationalism.
Okay, Professor Kim.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I wanted to press you about a strength and a weakness. The strength, which you didn't mention, is that, and I think it's a striking quality of China, is that there are lots of democratic mechanisms that have been institutionalized. And I'm not being entirely sarcastic. Nearly 1 million elections are held at village level.
Yeah.
Peng Yuan, plays the role of First Lady. There are 1,000 public opinion polling agencies. And there's lots of talk of the people. I mean, all of these are, in a curious, odd, paradoxical way, and when you add to them public forums and all of these new listening posts and learning mechanisms, I mean, there is a certain learning capacity within the system. I wonder what you would say about that. But the second thing is about, I want to press you to go a little bit deeper in the problem of corruption. The question about lawlessness and the purge, which is one way of seeing the present process. And I think you're in agreement about that. What is the chance, here's the weakness, that actually it is uncovering a very basic structural problem in the system, which was highlighted in a remarkable interview quite recently. I think it was Li Jianyu, who is a corruption expert in Beijing. He's obviously close to the Politburo. He points out that the whole system, from top to bottom, depends upon Guangxi. And the higher the rule is, according to him, the higher you go, the more total the corruption. And he estimates at the ministerial level that it's at least 80%. And he points out that if this were really to be carried through, Xi Jinping's time, through to the end, then it would actually paralyze important parts of the system. And he gives the example, I stop on this, of Naoming, where so many arrests and removals have taken place that if they carry on, the government, there literally will be no government of this city. So I'm wondering whether, looking at this, whether this will turn out to be a selective purge. There's an old tradition of that, getting rid of your enemies. And whether one of the unintended consequences might be to highlight this Guangxi problem, which is systemic.
Well, I think on the first issue, yes, it's true. Perhaps I didn't pay enough attention to that. There has been the kind of developments that you talked about, there's no doubt. But I would argue they've all been quite carefully controlled, in fact. And therefore there is a limitation to them. I'd add to that the growth of social media in China. Now, I know it's probably a rather fashionable thing to talk about social media, but there are those, Gary Epstein, my colleague at The Economist, argues that actually social media is a great prison because it enables the authorities to keep track on everybody. Well, I'm not sure you can keep track on 400 million users of social media. Of course, most social media, most exchanges are the usual kind of chitter-chatter. You know, I had nice congee for breakfast today, I saw your girlfriend out with another boy last night, etc., etc. But it's the mere fact of, and this links in to a sentence with what you were saying at the beginning, of individuals being able to talk to each other in a society where all media is intermediated by the party otherwise. And I think that is an important step change there. So yes, that's happening. On corruption, indeed, you know, one is led back to the remark of Chiang Kai-shek in 1927, I think, 28, when he said, if the party does not get rid of corruption, it will lose the trust of the people. If it does, it will have no members. And you know, that's a kind of obvious truism there, which I think is as true today. And the answer is, you are absolutely right, there will be a limit to this campaign. For instance, we have Xi Jinping's own brother-in-law, who is in Hong Kong and infamously uses family connections to his large benefit. We have Wen Jiabao's mother, who made an awful lot of money out of the flotation of Ping An Insurance Company, which her son had to sign off on. You know, this is pretty high. I doubt if either of them will be done in the short term. I think that Xi's aim is, to use Chinese, to strike hard, that he's hoping for a deterrent effect on, in particular, the state-owned enterprises. I think that is the centre of the thing, really. And you can see Li Peng's daughter, for instance, who runs one of the big power companies. She's made a big statement to her staff a few weeks ago saying, we must all follow Xi Jinping's anti-corruption line and so on. She's kind of got the message, you know, after quite a lot of other executives and other big SOEs have been fired for this. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if you stop all branches, if you stop all corruption, I think the system would come to a halt. There is, of course, the argument, which I don't buy, that actually corruption is useful in a system like the Chinese system without the rule of law, because it greases the wheels and it gets things done. But I think if you look at the 2008-2010 stimulus package and how the actual spending on infrastructure projects and others was about 1/4 of the amount of credit extended, you know, where did the rest of that money go to? It's very inefficient from a capital allocation viewpoint there. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think Xi Jinping recognises that if he's going to do this equation, this gamble, which I, as I said, I have my doubts about, but he obviously he thinks he can do that, he's got to make the Communist Party and the state organs more effective and more efficient. He actually wants a smaller Communist Party. When the number of new members fell last month, that is actually what he has said publicly, that he wants a smaller, leaner, better behaved, more effective, more in touch with the people, all the other phrases there, party. And part of that is eliminating corruption. But I doubt whether it is feasible in the system. You know, let's go back to the imperial era and the yamen and the magistrates and so on and so on. I'm afraid in any system where you have officials with the power to issue licenses or whatever it is, permission for people to do business and make money and even just live normally, you're going to have rent seeking. I think it's almost impossible. The answer, of course, is as in Hong Kong, although we've got some corruption cases going through in Hong Kong, you pay your civil servants as well as you pay middle, senior business executives. But I don't see that happening in China. In fact, Xi Jinping says he's going to reduce salaries.
Yes.
My name is Wolfgang Miedema. I own a business in China,
Right.
Which is probably one of the very few Australian wholly owned.
What are you doing now?
We got a chemical company manufacturing basically printing inks. One, just on the point of corruption, I guess, and this is definitely looking from a small business end, not from a corporate or a government-run business. Corruption is going down to the lowest level of any business. And this is, I see absolutely no chance at this point that corruption will be wiped out. Because basically, I think if you do that, the society will collapse. Not just the business will collapse, the society, because a lot of people get their income through corruption.
Well,
Day-to-day workers. I mean, I have stories, you know, which is unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
You do not do any business in China without paying somebody off.
It's built into the system.
And that is, I mean, and Xi Jinping, I know he's trying to cut the big boys first and do all this, but where is he going to stop? And this is virtually impossible.
I think it is. I think it will peter out in due course. I mean, it's lasted for longer than I expected at the beginning, because for reasons we said, I thought, you know, we'll have this for 6 months and then it'll peter out. But I think he's become, you know, this does happen with politicians and leaders. They become enamored of their own power and what they think they can do. And that can be quite dangerous and immense. I mean, this goes all through the system. Somebody told me recently that if you are a university, if you have tenure, if you're given a professorship at a university, you can buy a house on the university campus, which is usually a rather nice area, for 1/3 of the market price. But if you then leave and go to another university, you can sell it for the market price. You know, it's a built-in thing. It's even university professors. And it goes all the way through in this way. And I'm afraid I think you're right that it can't be eradicated. It's been going on for so long in China, etc. But I think Xi Jinping has this kind of, it's almost a crusader mentality. You know, I can eliminate this cancer and so on, which can be quite dangerous.
And another part, which I have actually personally experienced lately, our factories in a small village next to Nanjing. I know the mayor quite well, or the mayor changes.
The previous mayor or the president?
Well, I'm just saying, changes every 12 months, the mayor changes, right?
Yeah.
So you have, every time you got to do your honors and do all this. And in the past, obviously, one brings a few presents and brings good Australian wine, for example.
Yeah.
They always love that. All of a sudden, this was just a few months ago, I mean, there's a new mayor. They cannot accept anything. Absolutely. I mean, I was totally, you know, embarrassed actually in front of a big crowd. We had lunch together, and I brought a few gifts, and they said, no, we can't. Now the biggest problem with this is now because they are so paralyzed.
Yeah,
you know, you get nothing done
exactly.
on a local level. Nobody makes a decision because they're all worried if they lose the job.
So, yeah, that was certainly the case. It was interesting in the second quarter last year, after the anti-corruption campaign really got going, you saw the slowdown in projects which have been approved at local level but weren't being implemented precisely for the reason that you said. Exactly right. So I think it is. I mean, there are some slight exceptions to the rule, to say. I was in northern China at the beginning of this last year, visiting coal mines. I do that from time to time. And this was a state coal mine. And the boss said he'd like to invite us to a restaurant for a banquet lunch, but he couldn't do so anymore. So we would have to eat in the canteen. I and two colleagues. So he took us down to the canteen. But of course we weren't in the canteen. We were in a private room of the canteen with a 17-course banquet brought in from outside. But it had to be done behind closed doors. Yeah. But there was no drink. It was just coconut milk. That's the nature.
Any questions here? Even you can raise your question in Chinese.
It's difficult. My Chinese is terrible.
No, we can have someone who can make it.
My Chinese is terrible. I went to Hong Kong on overnight, more or less, to edit the paper, and I never have studied at a university like this Chinese, so I just picked up, taxi driver Chinese. That's my guilty secret.
Right. Thank you for Professor's speech. My name is Yu Qing. I'm a business scholar and with the Chinese scholarship. And I'm working with Professor Tony Welch in the educational research work. And I'm very interested in your topic. And because last week we also have a similar day about the Carnival China. Another professor in Sydney University also talked about something that what happened in China in current situation in China. And I wonder, because that day, Kerry also talked about something about the previous leadership, about Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. And he also compared some of the leadership and the before, the previous one, and the current one. Then I want to know what's your opinion about the previous leadership, Wen Jiabao and Hu Jintao, and also the current leadership.
Well, I may have rather similar views to Kerry. See, I endorse his book on the cover, saying they say we're two peas in a pod, speaking here. I think Hu Jintao, if you look at his period, 10 years as General Secretary, when he took over, you had this, let's go back, I mean, you have 1989, you have then Jiang Zemin being brought in as party secretary by Deng Xiaoping. Jiang Zemin, without a lot of experience, without national experience, coming from Shanghai, a bit isolated. Li Peng and the Conservatives very much making policy and undoing a lot of the reforms at that point. Then, in '93, you have Deng Xiaoping going on the southern tour, and it is, I think, generally accepted, saying in whatever form to Jiang Zemin, who sided with Li Peng and the Conservatives, who were the upper group at that point. Deng more or less saying to him, you better come on my side or else I'm going to get rid of you, and put somebody else in as General Secretary. So Jiang then went into the Deng mode. Then Deng, of course, declined in health and activity before dying in '97. And Jiang then continued, but again, you had Zhu Rongji coming out in the mid-90s, really as the strong man in terms of particularly economic policy and government policy. And impressively, whatever you think, I mean, there are downsides to Zhu Rongji. In a sense, he remade the state, he turned back on the 1980s town and village and bottom-up movement there, and you can argue the pros and cons of that. So, but then you have in 2002, Jiang having to step down, and rather the succession process is what I'm saying. It was very uncertain at that point because Jiang had been put there by Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was no longer around. Was Jiang going to put his person? What was happening? But who took over? But as having been, of course, Hu Jintao identified by Deng in 1989 as a young man who should run China one day because of his Tibet activities, and who took over, but it was a kind of, he had to make compromises at that point for his own position because he didn't have much power base himself. So he had to accept that Jiang Zemin stayed on as head of the military commission for a couple of years. He had to accept members of the Shanghai group in the standing committee of the Politburo. So he was a bit, didn't have authority, great authority. And Wen Jiabao, who had always been a senior civil servant, I mean a party bureaucrat there, and didn't have a political platform, political base really at all. I mean, the story is that after 1989, when of course he'd been linked with the reformists in the party secretary, that the Conservatives wanted to purge him, led by Bo Yibo, Bo Xilai's father, of course, whom it is said, when had not acted against during the Cultural Revolution. I don't know, this becomes very, very cloudy indeed. But when became best helper for Jiang Zemin, and Jiang Zemin really valued him for his knowledge of how the Beijing apparatus and political machinery worked, and he helped Jiang in that. So anyway, he became Prime Minister. He didn't really have a political base. Hu didn't either. And I think Hu then go ahead to 2007, the party congress, his group, the part of the Youth League group, was pushing Li Keqiang as the next generation leader. But Xi Jinping, very artfully, linked up with Jiang Zemin, with various other princelings, with other interest groups, and so on. And if you look back at Xi Jinping's history in particularly the eastern provinces, in Fujian, Zhejiang, and so on. There are a lot of people who are now very important in business and the party machine and the state machine who we worked with back then in the 1990s. And for instance, in the PLA, if you remember, there was the Taiwan Straits Crisis, 96 there. And there were a lot of the young generals, particularly in the artillery and missile detachments, who went to Fujian, where Xi Jinping was governor, and got to know him. So he got to know, he had a wonderful network, I think, Xi Jinping at that point, which Hu Jintao didn't have. Now, Hu Jintao operated largely, I think, by consensus. He had to, he could do what the Politburo, what the Standing Committee, what the power brokers as a whole agreed he could do. And that was a kind of consensus which kept stability and politically, and meant that you could organise the succession, which turned out was not for his man, it was for somebody else, for Xi Jinping. But that is managerially, from a political point of view, a positive development there. But I think, we are told the Standing Committee, the Politburo, they only make decisions if they're all sitting around the table. They don't do conference calls or anything else, or emails, and so on and so on. And you could see Hu Jintao sometimes, being almost kept, he had to be there with everybody around him, and he had to produce a consensus agreement out of that. And I think that made him a weak leader in the end. Some things were done, the rural reforms were certainly important.
The two leadership has some connection also the successor of the organization on the reform.
Yes, they are thinking, sorry, just to finish that, but I think that Xi Jinping, I think factionalism has become much less important in China since the 2012 Congress and so on. But I think Xi Jinping also rules as a consensus leader, but he's a strong consensus leader. If I were to use an English equivalent, he's rather like Winston Churchill during the war cabinet of the Second World War. This is a consensus government with a CEO, actually in England, Li Keqiang at the moment, and the leader who is really able to do what he wants on reform and other things, although that doesn't include political reform, it must be said.
This is the success of the reform.
Yes, no, it's a reform thing. But the interesting question now is whether she will start to, how should we put it, nibble away at associates of Hu Jintao.
Last question.
To see.
Last question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your stimulating presentation. I noted that you just mentioned that China has been underpinned by the great civilization and state. So could you kindly elaborate on how you come to your observation that China does not want to rule the world? And how about the soft power? Because I mentioned that a lot of Chinese academics now trying to influence the Chinese foreign policy in terms of the contribution to the Thin South or under heaven, and also Wang Tao and Pa Tao. So could you kindly elaborate on that point? Thank you so much.
Well, I don't think the Chinese empire civilization, going back over 1,000 years, it now goes back, was ever really to dominate the world. China is enough to itself. It wants respect, it wants a position in the world, of course it wants. Now on soft power, let me finish. I'm afraid I'm going to rush on because I'm going to get a plane to London in 2 minutes. Let me be controversial at the end. I think that China spends a lot of money and attention on soft power, and certainly people are far more aware, and that is an extremely good thing, of China in all its dimensions than they were, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Chinese culture, Chinese people coming out, 80 million visits abroad each year, Chinese students, university exchanges, etc., although some of those are quite controversial, of course. But I think this is a two-way process there. Well, that is happening. But also China, particularly Chinese cities, are becoming increasingly influenced by foreign influences, Western and Japanese and Korean. K-pop, for instance, and so on. So this isn't purely China going out and the Chinese soft power thing. It's working in both ways. So you can't see it like that. And to finish very controversially, I'm sorry, from a purely political point of view, we're told by some of the China rules the world advocates that we'll all adopt Chinese systems of governance and politics in the years to come. These will spread and so on. Well, you see people demonstrating in the Ukraine or the Middle East for Western democracy. They may be mistaken, I've never seen anybody marching in the street for the installation of the Chinese political system. So I'll finish with that. I'm sorry, I've got to go and catch a plane.
Thank you very much. Now we come to the conclusion. Thank you very much, Jonathan Fenby. Very good talk, and everybody learned a lot. And we all, more than half of the audience are Chinese. And lots of them are paying close attention to China.
I hope I didn't offend you.
No, not at all. I think we share a lot of things. I would like to have a chance to read your book to learn more about the country.
I should say the book, I'm not sure if it's in bookshops here. Books tend not to get to Australia, but if I can say in the way that books, if any booksellers are here, they hate it, but it is online on Kindle and so on. And you can download it quite cheap.
Thank you very much. That's the end of this talk. Thank you very much for your attending. Thank you.
Thank you.